episode 119. It's not you, it's not them, it's the system.
Welcome to Clinicians Creating Impact, a show for physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech-language pathologists looking to take the next step in their careers and make a real difference in the lives of their clients. If you're looking to improve the lives of neurodiverse children and families with neurological-based challenges, grow your own business, or simply show up to help clients, this is the show for you. I'm Heather Branscombe, therapist, certified coach, clinical director, and owner of Abilities Neurological Rehabilitation. I have over 25 years experience in both the public and private sectors, and I'm here to help you become the therapist you want to be, supporting people to work towards their dreams and live their best lives. You ready to dive in? Let's go.
Hi there. I want you, if you can, to picture a moment. Now, there's two versions of this moment, so take whichever one is closest to where you are right now. Maybe you're working with a rehabilitation assistant and a session didn't go the way that you pictured. Unfortunately, you weren't even in the room at the time. You just told the aftermath. Or maybe a client's family said something in passing, sent you an email, and it made you kind of wince a little. Or maybe you're not even there yet working with rehabilitation assistants. Maybe you're still deciding about whether to bring an RA onto your caseload at all. And what I'm describing is the exact thing that you're afraid of. And it makes sense because in our optional certification here at Abilities, we actually talk about what's the worst that could happen on purpose. And this session you didn't see, that email that made you wince, is actually that version of that worst thing. So in those two situations, hold whichever is yours and notice what happens specifically in your mind in the next 3 seconds. If you're like many of us, your brain writes a story, and it makes sense. Our brain are meaning makers. And almost every time, it's a character kind of story. So it goes one of two ways. Maybe this means that your rehab assistant isn't as good as you thought, or maybe I'm not cutting it out as a supervisor. Them or me. That's usually the home menu that your brain gives you. And I want to spend the next few minutes on the thing that menu leaves off, because there's actually a third explanation, and it's almost always the real one. And honestly, it's the one our brain often skips right past. So again, let's name those two doors that we usually pick from because they feel like the only two. So again, door one is them. Something went wrong, so the RA must be the problem. They're not skilled enough, not careful enough. The organization I work for didn't prepare them enough. They're not ready. And then door two is me. Something went wrong, so I must be the problem. I'm not being clear enough. I'm not on top of it enough. I'm not really cut out for this supervision thing. So here's what these two doors have in common. They're both actually verdicts. They're both a judgment about a person's character. One of them just happens to be pointed outwards and the other one inwards. But notice they're kind of the same kind of story. But again, there's actually a third door. And if we walk right past it, it's less dramatic and it doesn't feel like an answer at first. But the third door is the structure. That's the systems that you are both working inside of. Not their character, not yours, the structure. So maybe the instruction that was given was vague. The expectation was never actually made explicit. It just lived in your head. Or maybe the feedback loop was too thin, so a small thing had room to grow before anyone said anything. None of that is actually a person failing. All of it is a system that needed something that it didn't have. So if you get nothing else today, that's the reframe that I want to give to you today. When something feels off, before you reach for them or reach for me, before we decide it's a moral failing, let's reach for the structure first. It's structural. It's not personal. And once you can see that, troubleshooting and problem solving feels less like a judgment and starts feeling like something much more kinder. So, when I think about what structural actually looks like, again, structural is a nice word, but it can feel a little abstract. So, let's make it more concrete. Because again, when I say friction is structural, I mean it shows up in a handful of very specific, very ordinary ways. So, one is unclear instructions. You knew what you wanted, you just didn't say all of it because so much of what you do is automatic to you now. That's okay. And the rehab assistant did exactly what was said, which turned out to be not exactly quite what you meant. So, that's not defiance. It's not you being bad at your job. It's actually a gap between what was in your head and what was made into words. That's a skill, and a skill can be built. The second is mismatched expectations. So, again, you pictured how the session would go with the rehab assistant. They pictured it completely differently. Neither picture was wrong, but nobody put the two pictures side by side, so they only found out that they didn't match after the fact. Or the third option can be inconsistent feedback. Maybe things have been fine, and so you haven't said a lot. And then one thing goes sideways, and suddenly there's a lot of feedback all at once. And from the other side, that can feel like a lot of judgment coming out of nowhere. Whereas a steady trickle of small feedback, both good and constructive, is much easier to hear because a flood after silence feels much harder. Then, fourth, I want to offer is sometimes we give supervision that's either too distant or on the opposite side, too directive. So, again, too distant, they're guessing what does a good session look like. Too directive, and they never actually get to build their own judgment. Both of these are structural settings that you can adjust for. And as I mentioned all these, here's what I want you to notice about all four of them. If you take any one of these moments, wince, the email, the session that drifted, you can read it again as a character story. They're not good enough, or I'm not good enough. Or you can read the exact same moment as a structural story. The instruction was thin, or the expectation was never said out loud. Again, notice it's the same moment, but two completely different readings. And one of them points at something you can fix. This episode is brought to you by Jane, a practice management software and EMR that's here to make clinic life a little easier. Running a clinical practice means managing a lot of moving parts. That's why I love how Jane helps bring a little bit of calm to the busy by allowing me to set a schedule that works for my business. I can customize treatment types and times, locations, and staff availability to keep everyone organized and my organization running smoothly. Need to send intake forms or appointment reminders? Jane can automate those too, helping clients show up prepared and on time. And when it's time to pay, it's all taken care of. No extra card swipes or billing cleanup later. I'm proud to say that we at Abilities were one of the first of the early adopters of using Jane as our scheduling, billing, and charting solution. I love how easy it is to use for our clinicians, and we can always get quick and helpful support when we have questions or concerns. So if you're looking for software that cares as much about the business side of the clinic as you do about your clients, head to jane.app/demo to learn more. And if you're ready to sign up with Jane today, you can use my code ABILITIES1MO for your first month complimentary. This goes along with something that I say all the time. I say to myself, and I just want to name it here. Ease is evidence. So when the work between your rehab assistant and you feels extra hard, that friction isn't a character flaw showing up. It's actually just information. It's the system telling you exactly where it's thin. You can't solve a problem you don't know about. So that means the friction is doing you a favor. It's actually pointing you at the fix. So let's catch it early. Once you can see friction as structural instead of personal, something else becomes possible. And that possibility is you can deal with it early, and early changes everything. So here's the math of it. A small thing caught at the first sign of drift is a simple 2-minute conversation. Light, easy, almost casual. It's relationship building. That same exact thing left alone for 6 weeks is a much bigger conversation. And by then, it can be tangled up with resentment and maybe it's starting to touch client care. So notice nothing in that between those two situations changed except time. Time's the only variable. The problem didn't get worse on its own, it got worse because it waited. And again, the reason we usually wait is the character story we're telling ourselves. If the problem is their character or mine, then bringing it up feels like an accusation, a judgment, or like an admission. Who wants to do that over something small? None of us. Of course we don't. So we sit on it. If we decide the problem is structural, then that changes everything. Now the conversation isn't what's wrong with you, because that's a terrible thing to think of, hey. It's more like, hey, let's fix how we're working together. That's it. Light, easy. It's a completely different conversation. And you can have it on a Tuesday without your heart pounding and making it more than it is. Catching it early is actually maintenance. So, how we practice the how of that conversation is actually more of what we talk about inside our certification and inside of what we do here at Ability. So, I'm not going to talk about that here. If you're interested in it, you can connect with me and I could talk to you more about it. I want to give you the spirit of it because the spirit is the part that matters most. What you're doing is you're aiming for being direct without being punitive and curious without being evasive. You're not building a case. Again, this isn't judging. You're saying, I want this to work well. I noticed something and I want to understand it before it becomes a thing. That's the tone. That's the feeling that we want going into it. Warm, honest, and early. So I want to also acknowledge the quiet thing that's sitting underneath of this, especially if you're newer. Part of what makes working with an RA and that friction feel so loud is that the fear that it's on you. That if the RA gets something wrong, it's your license, your name, your responsibility on the line. And I'm not going to tell you that's not true because it is. You retain the accountability for the care. But I want to flip how that feels. Retained accountability isn't a weight sitting on your shoulders. It's the reminder that you never left the driver's seat. Good care, good extension of care that includes a rehab assistant means that you're still in control, which means troubleshooting the relationship between you and the rehabilitation assistant isn't overstepping and it's not micromanaging. It's just simply your role, done from that seat that you were always designed to sit in. So you don't have to earn the right to fix how you're working together. You already have that right. It's not the burden, it's the full point. So with that, I want to give you one thought that hopefully it's a reframe for you to carry and one thing for you to actually do. So the reframe again is this. Next time you're working with a rehabilitation assistant and something feels off, before you write the character story about them or about yourself, pause and ask a question. What kind of structure would have prevented this? That kind of question, or asked early and often, is most of the troubleshooting that you're going to need to do done with grace. And then the one thing that I'd offer for you to do this week, pick a single relationship that you have with a rehabilitation assistant that's felt maybe a little effortful lately, a little harder, and find the structural thread running through it. Maybe, again, it's the instruction that's a bit vague, or maybe the check in that's quietly not happening anymore. You don't have to fix everything. Just try fixing one thing this week and watch what changes, what feels easier. Because here's what matters beyond this week. This is the muscle that you, as you grow in your leadership and as your practice as a therapist, is exactly what's supposed to grow as you start to learn to work with rehabilitation assistants. It's that muscle that makes everything after it possible, whether you're working with assistants or families or other healthcare professionals. This is a leadership responsibility that can't be left to chance. We need to work on it. You can't turn it into leverage, into real impact, if every bit of friction in your professional life reads as a personal failure. What I know and what I've seen as evidence is the clinicians who grow into that next stage of their professional development aren't the ones who never hit friction. I hit friction all the time. The ones that are most successful are the ones that have learned to read that friction as structural and then fix the system instead of blaming the people. So again, it's not structural. Let me say that last sentence again. So again, it's structural. It's not personal. I'd invite you to carry that with you into your work today, next week, and in the future. I hope you've learned a lot today and taken away some things that you can use, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Clinicians Creating Impact podcast. Want to learn more about the work I'm doing with Abilities Rehabilitation? Head on over to abilitiesrehabilitation.com. See you next week.